I want to go all the way back to the beginning and talk about what was life growing up like in the house of a sharecropper as a farmer.
When I was 6 years old, that's when I first started having memories of what it was really about. My mama made me some sugar cookies for my 6th birthday, and my daddy told me that night, said, in the morning, you're getting old enough to get up and start helping with the farm. Well, I didn't know he was talking to me, and so the next morning when he said roll out, I just snuggled up, and he put that razor strap in that bed.
Ooh.
And so I started at 5 o'clock in the morning when I was 6 years old, feeding hogs, feeding mules, horses, milking cows, doing the chores that you had to do on a farm.
Right.
And that went right on. By the time I was 7 or 8 years old, I was plowing a mule right out in the fields with nobody out there. Daddy'd just take you out and put you in a big old 50 or 60 acre field and leave you there half a day and then come back at lunchtime. And so it was just work and learn and honor and principles. And I can remember we had 2 pictures in our house. We had one frame of one famed uncle, and I don't even know his name now, but and we had one, the 10 Commandments in a little black frame, and it hung on the wall. That was the only 2 pictures we had in the house.
Wow.
And so it was a humble beginning, but I tell you, it was good because you had to work hard, and you would taught honor, you would taught principle, you would taught patriotism, you would taught to vote, and you didn't have no clothes, you didn't have no shoes. My daddy was the 2nd generation off the reservation, and so he was a cruel man, but he was an honorable man. And so he would beat you. When he said yes, it meant yes, and it didn't mean talk back. He said no, it meant no, he meant go. And so that's kind of the way it was. It was tough, but it was good. We didn't have clothes or shoes, but we had plenty to eat. And so I was always thankful for that. And we thought we was good because we didn't know no better. I spent the first 17 years of my life in about a 5-mile circle.
There you go.
And so you really didn't know what was going on in the rest of the world. We didn't get a TV until 1954, and that was the year before I left home.
So when you left home, kind of tell the story of like what you think led to that. What was the first time when you were on the farm that you felt like inspired that there was more out there for Clyde Strickland?
Well, I guess I had got to that point. I was about 16 and a half, and it was one morning I can remember. It was about this time of year. Might have been in September. And we were grading tobacco. We had put in all the tobacco, and we were grading tobacco. And you graded tobacco on a grading bench, and you had about 5 different colors. And so I laid a leaf in there, and my dad said, "That's not the right color." And I said, "Well, it looks good to me." Well, he didn't say nothing else. He slapped me over the tobacco bench. Oh, no. And so I told him that day, because I said, "You ever hit me again, I'll kill you." And he said, "Well, you better leave." Well, he didn't know I was going to leave, but I walked up and got my clothes, and I had $3. I had all my clothes in one hand, and I walked up the road and thumbed down to Greenville, North Carolina, where my brother lived. That was about 35 miles from where we lived in. And that was the beginning of my being on myself and being out in the world at 16 and a half years old. And that's a venture too.
Yeah. So when I want to talk about the man with the black Lincoln. Was that before you left that you saw the?
And that was actually the whole time. He actually had a Cadillac.
Okay. All right. Tell me about that story.
Because, back in the old days, if you remember the old movies and all, the guy that owned the farms and the landowner, they always had a black Cadillac. And when they would come out, they would come and like my daddy, he respected Mr. Jordan. And he respected him, and I respected him. actually he wanted to adopt me one time. That was one of my big mistakes. But anyway, Daddy would always pick the finest watermelons and the finest tomatoes and corn, and so he would come out and when Daddy would barbecue pigs, and we'd have to go out and chop all that wood and drag it up and build the pits, but he would always get the finest meat, and we'd have to gnaw the bones.
So when Mr. Jordan was coming, your dad went all out for him.
Every time.
He sent his honor up.
Yep, that's the way it was.
That's amazing. That is, and so you probably saw that, and you're like, and that respect that your daddy was giving him, that did something in you, didn't it?
Well, it taught me a lot of things. It taught me to respect people. Mm-hmm. And my dad respected people, and
I could see that.
He said, mm-hmm. You respect your elders, you respect the authority above you, you respect the policeman, you just respect people in higher places.
It's a good lesson for life right there. Now you're out, you're 16, you're on your own, and so where's the first job that you take?
Well, I went down to my brother's, and being a person that had always been taught to make your own, I got a lawnmower and went out and started cutting grass for 50.
Really? That was the first thing? Okay.
Well, that was what I did to kind of pay back, because I didn't want to stay in his house and not give him something.
Right.
And so his wife, her name was Joyce, and they'd work all night, and she would take me all day, and 3 or 4 hours a day we'd go ride, and I'd try to find a job. Back then you didn't have McDonald's, you didn't have all these fast food, so mm-hmm. they weren't nobody looking for a 16-year-old to go to work. And so I was just begging somebody, please give me a job. And so at about the third week, we stopped at this place called a Silo Restaurant. Mm. And it was one of the biggest restaurants. It was in the top 10 in North Carolina at that time.
Wow.
And so they had a little side window walk up. So I walked up, and the girl was there. I told her I need a job and wanted to see the manager, the owner, and she said, we don't need nobody. Mm. I said, well, I needed to see the owner, and he happened to walk up, and this guy was Wilbur Hardy.
Okay, Wilbur Hardy, okay.
And he was eventually became the founder of Hardy Hamburgers.
Well, I think I've heard of that.
And so he looked down, and he said, I told him who I was and what I wanted, and he said, well, I don't need anybody, but give you a telephone number. I said, well, I don't have a telephone number. And think about this now, you're talking to Wilbur Hardy, right. He was a millionaire back then.
Yeah.
And you're talking to him, and you're telling him you don't have a telephone number, but you want a job. Uh-huh. And so he said, well, where do you live? I said, well, I told him where I was staying, and he said, I know where that is. He said, if I need somebody, I'll come and get you. So I left and went on thinking I wouldn't never see him anymore. And I got home, I got the lawnmower, started cutting the grass, cut my brother's grass, and this pink Lincoln pulled up in the driveway. Mm. And there was Mr. Hardy. And he said, just the way you talked and walked, I decided I'd come and give you a job. He said, when can you go to work? And we ain't talking about no money, we ain't talking about nothing. And I said, when do you want me? He said, 5 o'clock in the morning. Well, I didn't have no car, no way to get there. So I got up at 2 o'clock.
Wow.
I walked 6 miles. Mm. But back then, after people seen you side the road in the mornings or any time, they'd stop pick you up.
Yeah.
It was kind of a honor thing back in the 50s. Mm-hmm. And so after the second morning I walked, this guy would come by and pick me up and drop me off. So
right, when he was on his way to work. And
he was on his way somewhere to work. Mm-hmm. And so after that, 2 weeks, I went to work 12 hours a day, 6 days a week for $35 a week.
Wow.
And 2 weeks later, I bought my first car, a 1950 Studebaker for $150.
There you go.
$10 down and $5 a week. Mm. And I started riding. And we bought them 50-cent tires and used tires. And Mr. Hardy walked back there. This guy that was a head guy at Silo Restaurant, he cussed and raised sand just like my daddy. He was just like my daddy.
Uh-oh.
And so that was about the second week. I just got tired of it, so I walked back there in the back and just sat down and started peeling potatoes or something. I don't know what I was doing, but Mr. Hardy walked back there and said, what you doing, Clyde? I said, well, I can't take this guy. He just like my daddy. And I said, I can't work for people cussing you and all the time. And he said, you think you can do that job?
Oh.
I said, with your help? He went and fired that guy and put me over 16 people. Think about this. I'm not even 17 years old. And so he taught me how to cut meat, how to cook the best steak in the world, how to cook the best chickens, fish, and how to become a real good chef. And so he put me over the whole kitchen and give me a $10 a week raise. I was on cloud nine.
Man. And he went on, and this is the founder of Hardee's that we're talking about. And he saw something in you at a very early age where he was like, this kid's going to show up and keep showing up and keep showing up. And I think that, he probably already kind of knew about that guy that was running the place and had his, thoughts about it as a leader, and saw the potential in you and saw your leadership abilities even at a young age. He knew.
Well, in that first 2 weeks, I found a guy, one of the old employees, was stealing country ham, and he would put it inside of his coat. And so I went and I told him first not to do it, because being in the military, I was a tough guy back then, and
right.
I'd go right to you and approach you and try to get you to do what's right. Well, he still kept stealing that ham, so I turned him into Mr. Hardy. And I think that honesty and that hard work, just being there every day, 15 or 20 minutes early and staying late every night, being sure that everything was perfect, that he seen something in me.
Now, you were 19 when you joined the Army, correct?
19.
And tell me a little bit about that. How did that happen?
Well, I didn't know it, but I'd give my sister-in-law's brother a job. Well, he wanted my job. And so we all would get off 3 hours in the afternoon from 2 to 5, and we go off and chase girls and just have fun, whatever young people do it.
Riding that Studebaker around.
Yeah, riding that Studebaker. And so we'd go out, and so one day we decided we would go join the Air Force. We were going to fly into the wild blue yonder.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah.
And so we go into the Air Force recruiters. Well, neither one of us had a high school education, so they said, well, you can't go in the Air Force. So said, go down to the Navy. I said, no, I don't want to go to the Navy. I've been in the ocean. They got big fish out there to eat you up. And so went down to the Army, and I was the only one that joined. And about 6 months later, I went into the military, and that was my best day.
Now, in the military, tell me about what you learned there. I know it formed a lot of your character and also gave you that importance for education that you've had over the years.
Well, the first thing I learned in the probably my second 8 weeks of training, when I was taking pre-airborne training, I had to take hand-to-hand combat. And I'd always been a guy that would fight to the finish. My daddy says if you don't keep beating them until they get up, but I learned to respect people, and I learned that it didn't matter if you was in war or battle or what you were in, that hand-to-hand combat, I think everybody should take defensive training, because it gives you a mental mindset that you don't have to kill people. You just make them say uncle, and then you reach down, shake their hand, and pat them on the back and say, now let's go do our job, whatever we got to do.
That's right.
And so it taught me, I learned patriotism. I still cry when they play the national anthem.
Yes, sir.
And I learned that patriotism. But I couldn't even, I was so uneducated, I probably had about a 5th grade education, even though I went 3 months into 10th grade. And so I couldn't even sign a vehicle out of the motor pool. Nobody never knew this, though. Nobody in the military never knew how uneducated I was, because I was always smart. And so I would get a prerequisition, and I'd just copy it. And so then one day I realized, you got to get some more education. So I got through my training, got to Germany, and I started back to school and got my GED in Germany. And I started taking all these advanced leadership. I tell people all the day, like my grandchildren, one of my grandsons, he's the vice president of the Republican Party in Oconee high schools. And I teach them about patriotism, and I teach them about being leaders, and that you got to step out and be the president of your class or the vice president or the secretary. You got to do something in the leadership role if you're going to achieve things in life.
Yeah. And it starts off, it doesn't, people get discouraged because they feel like maybe they don't know it all, or they don't have the education that they need, and no, I don't have that kind of degree. And one of the reasons I love working with David upstairs is because he has this saying that his daddy taught him, which was RTB, which means read the book, which means like when you don't know how to do it, go back and read the book.
Read the manual.
Like you were saying, you would look at what they were doing, and then you would emulate it, and then you would be confident in it, and then you would lead the other people when you were in Germany. So you were there for 2.5 years, and then you come back from Germany, and you're at home. I think you go to work for a textile mill, and this is the important thing. You meet Miss Sandra.
Amen.
So tell me that story. I love a good love story now.
Actually, this is the best love story in the world, because I had you don't get a lot of fruit and stuff in the military, most especially in Germany. If you got an apple or orange every once in a while,
that was a treat.
That was a treat.
Yeah.
And so here we are in the spring. You got strawberries, you got peaches, you got pretty tomatoes. I mean, you got everything. And then you got this pretty red-headed woman, a girl. And so I would pull up, and I always kept my cars. They were so shiny that you could shave in them. I'd wax them every week, and so when I'd stop, I'd see her eyes following me down the road. And so after about the third time I stopped, and I can remember the first thing I ever said to her to this day, I said, "You know the price of eggs in China?" And that blowed her completely away, because she didn't know what in the world that was.
You just came from left field.
Yeah.
Asked her something no one ever asked her before. Well, how much are the eggs in China, Clyde?
About a penny a dozen.
What did she say?
She just laughed, and she said no, funny. And she wouldn't date me. She wouldn't date me, but her mother.
I know what that feels like, really.
Yeah, her mother said, "Now that's a good-looking guy," and I was good-looking back then. I mean, I was slim,
still good-looking, Clyde.
Lean. I was a lean fighting machine, and and I went to work every day. Most of the time I'd work 12 hours a day in the textile mill. And so her mother said, "You need to date him. He's a nice guy." And so about 3 years before that, her godmother had got her, she was a Baptist, and got her to start to the Episcopal Church. And so the only way Sandra would date me is if I went to church with her.
Oh, okay.
So we went to the Episcopal Church, and I'd never been in an Episcopal church in my life. And this is the oldest Episcopal church in North Carolina. It's called Calvary Parish. It sits on a whole block, and it's right in the middle of a cemetery. And to keep everything's so immaculate. It's like when you walk in, it's like being in heaven. It's so peaceful. And so God planned all this, and so we'd go to church, and then the first date we went to see John Wayne and the Paratroopers.
Oh, okay.
And so, because me and being an old soldier, I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so we've always loved movies, and so I ended up starting to actually she was teaching the 10 Commandments and singing in the choir, and so I ended up becoming Episcopalian.
There you go.
And so God had a plan for Sandra and I. And so she thought I was the white knight that God had sent to save her and to get her. And I knew she was the angel the first day I ever seen her that God had sent me. And because she was so pure and always has been 58 years later. And I know she was the angel that he sent to save me.
Well, there you were. You found the love of your life. You're working in manufacturing in a textile mill. And what was Sandra doing at that time?
Well, she was going to high school. She was playing in the band, and she had 2 scholarships to East Carolina College. And so on Christmas, 6 months later, I asked her to marry me. And her godmother thought she'd go crazy and give up them scholarships to marry me. And so she actually went to work in the textile with me because she didn't drive.
Okay, I thought that was right. I thought that you guys both had worked in manufacturing back then.
Yeah, she worked about 3 months, and
okay.
From the time we got married in June the 29th in '63.
Okay.
And from the time we got married, I was working 4 jobs. I'd actually work in a textile mill. Then I would go out and fold pasteboard from 2 factories, and I'd fold it up and pile it in a pile at our house, and then on Friday, I'd drive it all the way to Roanoke Rapids and sell it, and then I'd haul dirt. I'd load dirt with a shovel, unload it with a shovel, and spread it for $5 a load. And some days I'd haul 4 loads before I went to work. And on Saturday morning, I'd get up and go get 31 bushel sweet potato. Don't never ask me why I got 31 bushels, because that's just all I could get on the truck. And so I would take them and put a peck in each hand and run from door to door and sell 31 bushel sweet potatoes. I never took no more than 5 hours. So I worked 4 jobs, and so I was making more money than the mayor.
Now you entrepreneur, like that was a word that nobody really said back then, is just that you were thinking about every single way that you could make money, and when you saw an opportunity, you went after it.
Make money honest.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And Sanders' daddy, he had this little produce stand. And so one day Clyde said, you need to run up here and get some of them little green butter beans. And so down to Edenton, North Carolina. So I got up about 2 o'clock in the morning, didn't go to bed at 12. So I got up at 2, drove down to Eden and got 125 bushels of butter beans and drove to Raleigh, North Carolina. Made $125 before lunch.
Wow, you're delivering it.
And so then I started getting a load of butter beans every day. I quit the textile business.
There you go.
And that was the end of the textile. And so a little while later, he said, if we had a big truck, we could really make some money. Well, you don't plant a seed in Clyde's mind. So I go down, I buy the biggest truck Chevrolet makes.
Oh, there you go.
So here I come.
That's right.
And we built a beautiful produce body on it. And so off we went into produce business. And for long we had 2 trucks. And so went from $2,500 a year to $36,000 in 1 year. So that was the beginning. I knew that there was money out there that we just had to turn rocks over to find it.
Amen. That's awesome.
And so that was how I got into the first real business that I ever was in hauling produce. We pulled it from Immokalee, Florida to Columbia, South Carolina, from all up to Raleigh, all the way back up to Pennsylvania. And
that's something that we have in common that I never knew we had in common, is that my first job, it wasn't your first job, but my first job was at produce. And I worked for Chadwick. Greg Chadwick and Gary Chadwick went to high school with me. And their dad ran Chadwick's Produce on the corner of Brazelton Highway and Highway 20. I can't tell you how many years. It's still there. 40, 50 years
how
business.
About that?
And their kids run it now. But they had one in Decula. They had one in Lawrenceville. And they make the best boiled peanuts you ever had in your life, still to this day. But we would go there, and it started off selling Christmas trees and pumpkins and produce. But you have to drive the truck down. You have to pick up a load. You have to bring it back. You have to sell it. You have to flip it. You have to go back, get you another load.
That's it. That's what we did.
Yep. And so I know that business. That was my first business. And then, that also changed. That was the business that I got out of when I found TV. So I went down to the local TV station and I bought 30 minutes of airtime for $60. Started selling commercials because I didn't want to cut yards or do anything else. So that's what I did.
That cutting yard gets sweaty.
I figured out a way to make money in high school. I was probably 16, 17 years old when I started that TV show. But then once you came out of produce, you found waterproofing. Tell me.
It was a crazy thing. First daughter, Teresa, our only daughter, was born. And so I realized that talking to Sander, and me and her both realized you can't raise a child spending 23 hours a day and bounce it up down the road in a truck.
That's very true. Yes, sir.
And they wrote this song about me, run the wheels off of a Greyhound bus. I run the wheels off of them produce trucks. Mm-hmm. And so I went from there. I took a job driving a milk truck in Morganton, North Carolina for $100 a week. Well, we were spending more money than that on ice cream. And so I knew something happened. And my brother, he worked for Holbrook Waterproofing out of Charlotte. And so one day, Mr. Holbrook came by, and he said, just the way your family works and y'all's work ethics, I'll give you 50 cents an hour more. And at that time, I'd went over and went to work for General Electric and had my first union job. I didn't know that God was planning me and preparing me to move to Georgia.
Yeah.
And so I quit, and we moved to Charlotte. And I went into waterproofing at $2.50 an hour and started into waterproofing. And the first 2 weeks I was into waterproofing, I started changing the waterproofing industry. Mm-hmm. Back then, people picked up their laborers, and they'd go downtown Charlotte, and they'd pick up their laborers. And, well, I'd been in the military and the textile business. Nobody picked up nobody. So I said, we're doing something wrong here. Mm-hmm. And so the boss said, well, you can't change it. I've been trying. I said, you give it to me, I can change it. So I just told them, Monday morning, y'all going to show up for work, and the ones that don't ain't going to work. And so after a couple of weeks, we'd had to replace a couple people, but everybody was showing up, and I started revolutionizing the waterproofing business. And actually,
sir,
I worked with companies like GE and Dow Chemical and Trimco, the large manufacturers of caulking compound, and helped them change their formulas and change the whole waterproofing industry.
The insight and that instinct that you had of looking for opportunities from business to business, once you found waterproofing, now you're looking at the opportunities under waterproofing. So you're in waterproofing, and now, Clyde, you are finding you're innovating inside of that world, and I think you blossom right there.
I did.
Because you found your niche, you found your area, and then you started taking big chances and big opportunities within that.
Well, within 2 weeks, he made me foreman. 3 months I made top pay. Didn't even know how to spell caulking. I thought caulking would spell CALKING. And it had a U in it.
Yeah.
And I didn't even know how to spell caulking.
That is funny.
But I knew how to manage people, and I knew how to tell time.
That's right.
And it said work 8 hours. You work 8 hours, you get 8 hours pay. And so that's what I loved to enforce, was the rules and regulations and policies. And so that was the beginning of my waterproofing experience. And then seven months later, on October the 23rd, 1966, I took a little trip. I fell 7 floors.
Oh, my goodness.
Off of Duke Hospital. And they said I'd never walk again, wouldn't never work again. I had crushed my spine, had 276 stitches in my face, 5 teeth knocked out. My right arm was completely demolished. And one of my knees, I could stick my finger in a hole in my knee. And but
it's a bad fall. Most people don't live from a fall like that.
Well, I found out later that 90% of people that fall 40 feet die.
Oh my goodness.
And the guy that was with me, he died. And that was a mental tragedy. But 7 days later, they said I'd be in the hospital 3 or 4 months. 7 days later, they rolled me to the door. I said, I ain't getting in that, riding back to Charlotte in an ambulance. And so they drove up, and I lay in the back of a 98 Oldsmobile, and with my head on a pillar, but I walked 3 steps to get in it. And my daughter, Teresa, by that time, she was about 1 year old. And so she loved ice cream. And so we lived in an apartment, but down the hill was a little ice cream 7-Eleven store, and they sold dip ice cream. So I'd go down every day and get her an ice cream cone And I believe just that walking back and forth, by the time I get back, it'd be running down my hand. But me and her got a bond that was unbelievable. And so 5 weeks later, I told my boss, well, we actually got the first electric scaffold that was ever brought into Southeast. Now, back when I fell, you didn't have safety lines.
Right.
You didn't have nothing. And so we got the first electric scalpel. And so they couldn't rig it because they forgot to read the manual. And so they called Clyde, and they come pick me up. Well, I'm walking with a walking stick, got a brace. I can't even tie my shoes. But I go down and get the manual and rig up the scaffold. And the next morning, my brother said, he called me that night and said, "Why don't you go down and help me tomorrow?" I said, "All you have to do is just mash this button." Well, he put that scaffold on the 10th floor purposely. So we crawl out a window. Now here I am. I can't even walk. I can't bend over. But I finally crawled out a window on the 10th floor. I'm shaking so bad.
You're right.
And because I'm scared to death.
Yeah, I mean, you just fell.
Well, within 2 floors, my nerves come right out. I couldn't bend over, but I told him, I said, you do the bottoms, I'll do the tops. So we started caulking. We caulked that whole 10-story drop that day. And so I called the boss that night and told him, I said, I got to have me a job. He said, well, the only job I got, this is God looking out for me. He said, the only job I got is this VA hospital in Salisbury, North Carolina. You go up there, and if you can drive 145 miles a day and drive up and,
goodness gracious,
and run the crew.
Yeah.
So I'd get up, Sandra would tie my shoes, fix my lunch. I'd pick up the crew. We'd drive to Salisbury, North Carolina. I'd get the crew started, and I'd had a little wood chair. And so I'd sit down and get with the engineer of the hospital. So I fell in love with historical restoration.
Oh, okay. All right.
And
that makes sense.
And that was, I started studying and learning how to be a historian and to restore old buildings.
Wow.
And so
you would have never even been there if you hadn't fell.
Eventually became the #1 historian in the South.
That's right. Goodness gracious.
And so that's how God does. Sometimes you get tragedy in your life, but you got to turn tragedy into profit.
That is so true. That is so true.
And so that's how I got into the historical restoration business. And then, won't be just a few months later, we had the first union job in Georgia. The trust company headquarters. This is how I got to Georgia. We had the first union job. It was on Edgewood Avenue, the trust company headquarters.
That's right. Okay.
And so we had sent a guy down to do it, but it was all union. And so they'd already spent all the money. And so the boss called me. I was in Danville, Virginia, said, Monday morning, I want you in Atlanta. That's how they did back then. They didn't ask you, they just told you.
They just said it. And if you weren't there, somebody else's job.
Yeah, they said, come on in. Said, I want you to be in Atlanta at 8 o'clock Monday morning. Well, then he tells me the whole story. We're out of money. We done spent all the money. We still got 26 floors to go.
Oh, my goodness.
And we ain't even got out of the ground yet. And so you got to go down there and get it done as cheap as you can, get out of Georgia. Well, now we're back to that, working for General Electric them 3 months. I learned what unions was about. So he gave me the union book. I studied that over the weekend. I came to Georgia, finished the job, ended up selling enough extras and started selling jobs. And because I wouldn't sit in the motel and wait. Once I'd get caught up, I'd go out and start selling little jobs and doing more work.
Right.
And so I talked him into opening office in Georgia. And so that's in 60, that was in 68. And so January the 1st, Kenny was born on December the 13th. So January the 1st, we moved to Georgia. He wasn't in a month old. And we moved to Georgia and moved to Duluth. And I opened the Holbrook Waterproofing Georgia office and started with me and Sandra. Sandra was the secretary, and I was the general manager, worker, the killer, the everything.
Yep.
And so a year later, I had 50-some employees.
Started off with a pickup truck and a ladder.
And, well, that was the way. and so then I decided that, well, I actually quit. And he talked me into coming back to work and give me 13% or 17% of the company. Sold me 17% of Holbrook Waterproofing to Georgia.
You were selling everything down here. He had to give you something.
Yeah, well, the only difference, he forgot to mail me my check.
See, that's a problem. That's a big problem
that's
right
a
there.
problem right there. Well, all these things was lessons that
Right.
I should drop back and tell you about I'd been working there 3 months, and he give bonuses every 3 months.
Okay.
And this was another lesson he taught me. We still do it to this day in Metro Waterproofing. And so he would give out bonuses every quarter.
Uh-huh.
So he used to give me a $100 bill, but I hadn't only been there 3 months. I hadn't even been there 3 months.
Wow.
And I had never had over a $5 bonus in a textile. They don't give you no more than a $5 bonus.
$100 was a lot back in the
Oh, that was a
mid-60s
lot of
too.
money.
Yeah, it was a lot of money.
And so the next quarter come along, and we came in, and me and my brother lived on the same street. So he just handed us an envelope. I stuck it in my shirt pocket, but I felt it. It was thick.
Mm-hmm.
And so I felt it, and I said, "God be $1 bills." And so we stopped by the convenience store because we loved to drink a cold beer on the way home back then.
Uh-huh.
And so we got us a 6-pack, and they said, "Well, I'll see how much money we got, how much bonus." So I opened it up, and I remember to this day it was $1,251. And I don't know how he came up with that amount, but I throwed that on the table. I told my wife, Sandra, I said, "I found me a home.
Yeah.
This is what I'm going to do." And so to this day, we still give bonuses. That
That's
was
great.
lessons that he taught me.
Mm.
And so, but he forgot one thing. He forgot to mail me my check.
Yep, he did. And the Clyde Strickland that was back in 1960-something wasn't going to take that.
No, sir. We decided I had a $10,000. I could sign my name. I had a signature loan of $10,000. Didn't know nothing about banking.
Mm-hmm.
And so today I owed the Bank of Duluth $2,700. So I had $3,500 in the bank. So I just said, well, I'll just pay them off, and then I'll borrow $10,000. I'll start my business. Well, walked in the bank the next day, gonna borrow $10,000. They said, well, you're starting a new business. You'll be broke in 6 months. We can't loan you no money. And I done give them all my money.
Oh, no.
And so I went, and luckily God had looked after me, and I had equity in my house.
Mm.
We had moved to Lawrenceville because they had a grocery store over there, and we helped start the first Episcopal church in Gwinnett County.
Okay, yeah.
And that was St. Edward's in Lawrenceville.
Okay.
And so we had moved to Lawrenceville, and we had equity in our house. And so we put up our house and borrowed $6,000, and we started Metro Waterproofing with a $6,000 second mortgage, a $100 ladder, and a $1,400 pickup truck. And those people don't know this,
And
but
so
Metro
it began.
Waterproofing is actually incorporated in Gwinnett County.
Well, I did not know that. Yeah.
And it's a Gwinnett County corporation.
Oh, wow. Well, that's an amazing thing, really.
So we started in a room in our house, and we had a $98 typewriter and a $27 desk. We still got that desk. And,
Do you?
And that's how we started Metro Waterproofing. We had a $98 typewriter and a $27 desk. And we went out the first month. I had 8 employees the first month. And so we owed $14,000 in material bills. And we couldn't even pay the employees. And I drove to Toccoa and picked up a check from Felt Brothers Contracting. That was the first job I ever did, was in Toccoa, Georgia. And I picked up the check, and we've never missed a payroll. And next January the 13th, to be 50 years.
Well, praise him. You know, the crazy. Now, I heard this story. I don't know who told me this story, but you can tell me if it's true or not. So, where was the Holbrook office at when you left Holbrook? Where was that office at?
Well, I had found this piece of property, and I've always been a guy that loved to figure out the best way, the shortest route, the most profitable.
Right.
So I had bought this piece of land for Holbrook down on Kentucky Street in Scottsdale. Well, his office was down the street, but I liked that location so good, I decided I'd go right up the street and bought me a house 3 houses away from where his office was.
Well, see, I heard that. I heard that, when, you don't turn your back on Clyde because he built an office right across the street and put the other guy right out of business.
Well, I always had that honor. I never asked not one of his employees to come to work for me.
Oh, that's good.
But we paid $12,000 for an old mill house, put an office in it, put a fence around it, and all his employees would just walk up the street and come to work for me. And before you know it, they had to sell out and move.
Well, the thing was he sent you down to Georgia to sell and make this business, and so the people, your customers, knew you. They didn't care what the name of the business was.
Well, that's what everybody said. We don't know Holbrook. We've never seen him.
Yeah, right. They knew Clyde Strickland. So
they know who Clyde is.
That's right.
He's honest and honorable.
And you got a company called Metro Waterproofing now. And so that was the late 60s into the 70s. And, of course, Atlanta and the metro area and even Gwinnett started booming. I mean, they were building left and right.
That was in 1972, January the 13th. 13 is our lucky number.
Oh, wow, okay.
And so both of our boys was born on Friday the 13th.
Oh, really?
And we moved on the 13th of January to Georgia, and we started our business on January the 13th, 1972. And the house we live in right now is our 13th house.
Well, what do you know?